Hey guys, here we are again with another highly requested episode of Real vs. Real, and the most recent to win my poll on Patreon. Now, as you may have noticed, I'm in a slightly different setting than I normally am for Real vs. Real, and the reason for this is I'm going through a slight transition period. I've got some new lights, hence why I can film this at night without it looking completely horrible, and I've got my green screen up right now where my normal placement is for these episodes. So I plan on doing some more stuff, like a little bit, hopefully better looking videos and stuff, and hopefully I'm planning on getting a mic for my camera at some point if I ever get expendable income, as well, so that I can improve the way this looks and sounds. That said, because of this, you're not going to see much of my beautiful face for most of this review, and it's going to be mostly voiceover. So yeah, let's get started. I know some of you are already asking, why compare these two films? Despite the fact that they are indeed Disney and DreamWorks, they were not made around the same time, and from the outside have very little in common. Indeed, it would probably make more sense to either compare How to Train Your Dragon with its sequel, or Lilo and Stitch with something like Home. Well, that may very well happen in the future. Seeing as there's no doubt that How to Train Your Dragon 3 will be a thing, I'll probably just compare all three of these movies like I've done with franchises in the past. But for now, there are a couple reasons why I'm comparing these two films now. Firstly, these two films have the same directors, Deblois and Chris Sanders. Secondly, they both involve a human befriending a non-human creature utilizing a relationship similar to that of a beloved pet. Both characters are outcasts among their peers, and both are also dealing with a dysfunctional family dynamic. And lastly, as I said, it's another review that has been highly requested since even before my hiatus. So, let's begin. Alright, well, this one is somewhat difficult in both cases. Neither film has a big emphasis on music, relying mainly on a score that works pretty well for both films, and both movies have completely different art styles, both of which are nice to look at. I love the design of the characters in How to Train Your Dragon, the stylized skinny limbs with massive fur boots and the massive Viking-like characters. I find it very endearing on all accounts. At the same time, with Lilo and Stitch, well, let me put it this way. Moana was not the first Hawaiian Disney movie that utilized more realistic body proportions. So, I'm gonna split the difference here. How to Train Your Dragon gets the point for music, because I remember the score better than I do for Lilo and Stitch. It's distinctive enough so that the second you hear it, you know where it's from. And Lilo and Stitch gets the point for animation for its nice combination of sci-fi, Hawaii, and unique character designs. Since both of these films focus a lot on the friendship of the main characters, similar to El Dorado vs. The Emperor's New Groove, I'm going to start by focusing on those particular characters and relationships. Let's begin with Lilo and Stitch. Lilo is a young Hawaiian girl who lives with her older sister Nani, who became her guardian after their parents succumbed to Disney-itis. She has a hard time fitting in with the other children her age because she's a bit eccentric.
My friends need to be punished.
In addition to this, her and her sister struggle to maintain their family. Her and Nani attempt to adopt a pet for her, and said pet winds up being Stitch, a crashed alien experiment created to be an unstoppable destructive force. Now, Disney tropes aside, the family dynamic in Lilo and Stitch is extremely well executed. It focuses on a surprisingly realistic struggle, and is the driving force for Lilo and Stitch's relationship as well, as Stitch witnesses this family dynamic and doesn't know what to make of it. This of course leads to curiosity and eventually a strong bond between him and Lilo. Both characters are very enjoyable. Lilo's weird quirks make her a memorable character with a unique, morose personality that is both amusing and raises her above the typical cute kid type character. Stitch manages to be a complete jerk for most of the movie while still being likable, and his transformation is believable and touching. They're a good pair and strong characters. And it would seem that these directors are good at this kind of thing because they did it again with How to Train Your Dragon. Hiccup is also an outcast with family troubles. In this case, though, he's a bit more of a cliche outcast type. Scrawny, awkward, clumsy, with unique talent that will, of course, come to his advantage as the film goes on. His family problems derive from the fact that his father is the chief and doesn't understand him, which is admittedly also a bit cliche. In the case of How to Train Your Dragon, he befriends Toothless, a dragon of a species called the Night Fury, after shooting it down and injuring it. When he decides not to kill it, despite the fact that his whole culture is practically built on slaying dragons, a tentative friendship begins between the two. The relationship here is even more of that between, say, a boy and his dog, because while Toothless seems intelligent, unlike Stitch, he doesn't speak. The relationship is made even more meaningful by the fact that they're supposed to be enemies. Not only is it easy to get caught up in their building friendship, but it genuinely hurts when things start to go wrong. Now, I'm not saying that Lilo and Stitch doesn't have its touching moments or its sad moments. I'm just saying that, at least in the case of these two films, Hiccup and Toothless leave more of an impact. The slow buildup of trust between the two, the loyalty that grows from that, and the parallels that form between the characters are all extremely well done and well paced. So while both relationships and both sets of characters are genuinely strong, I'm gonna give this one to How to Train Your Dragon. Both movies have their share of side characters, and again, both groups of side characters are pretty strong. As I already said, the family dynamic in Lilo and Stitch is probably one of its best elements. Lilo and Nani's relationship is touching and believable. Unlike a lot of films where a family comes off as dysfunctional, in this case it's clearly not because the characters themselves aren't trying or don't understand each other or need to learn some kind of lesson. They do love each other. They do have a good relationship. They just keep getting beat down by life and unfortunate circumstances. It probably would have been easy to make Nani a less sympathetic character and write her as more of a trope, someone who is maybe strict and has to grow. But showing that she's trying her best and that certain things are just out of her control makes her a far more believable character and makes her and Lilo's relationship feel genuine. How to Train Your Dragon goes, again, the more predictable route. Hiccup's father, Stoic, doesn't listen to or understand his son, and the relationship is strained because they're so different. This escalates to the point where once he finds out that his son has, to his mind, betrayed their people, he straight up disowns him. Now I will say this though, and I'll go into it a bit more when I get to the story. How to Train Your Dragon has a lot of tropes, but it handles them in a way that weirdly kind of works. And it does so by just adding a few details that another movie might not add. For instance, it takes the time to build these characters so that the dynamic feels less mean-spirited, and scenes like the awkward talk Stoic and Hiccup have, where it shows that both characters don't know how to talk to each other, but make an attempt to. And this one moment after Stoic disowns him, this one scene that could have easily not been included, does wonders for giving the character some humanity. You can tell that he regrets saying what he did immediately after he says it, and this makes it so that when he does apologize later, you believe it. But what about the other characters? In Lilo and Stitch, the surrogate villains for a large part of the film are Jumba and Pleakley, but they're far too likable to be actual villains and are ultimately replaced by Captain Gantu. They have a fun dynamic themselves as they stalk Stitch in an attempt to capture him and bring him back. They feel more like comic relief than villains and ultimately switch sides. Although, while it is an amusing moment, it's not necessarily believable. You guys were just chasing him around with a gun a bit ago, but okay, I guess that's all it took. Meanwhile, the side characters in How to Train Your Dragon include the kids in Gabber. Gabber's definitely a comic relief side character and is pretty likable and amusing. The kids too have their moments, although they themselves do not escape being kind of tropey. This is especially true for Astrid, who I certainly don't dislike. She's a pretty cool character, but does have a very predictable relationship with Hiccup. Because of this, I'm giving this one to Lilo and Stitch. Jumba and Pleakley are funny, even though their transition from enemy to ally is a little rushed, and Nani is well developed and her relationship with Lilo is well written. As for villains, well, I'll make this brief. Captain Gantu is boring, and giant dragons are cool. If he were a better character or were in the film longer, I might give him the point since, well, the giant dragon isn't all that developed or in the film very long either, but it's still a giant dragon, and this scene is really awesome. So, yeah. And once again, we come to story. Lilo and Stitch came out at a time when Disney seemed to be going through a bit of an identity crisis. It was the movie that released after The Emperor's New Groove and Atlantis: The Last Empire, and before movies like Treasure Planet, Brother Bear, and it seemed to try to have the same kind of tone as movies like The Emperor's New Groove. It was more silly and random, and it focused on a less typical story for Disney. It was also not exceptionally popular. Really, none of the films released around this time did all that well for Disney. In some cases, and in my opinion this is one of those cases, these movies are underrated. I quite liked Lilo and Stitch when it was released, and still really like it a lot. I will say that as unique as the story is, and as strong as the relationships are, its structure does suffer a little. The third act feels considerably weaker than the first two, and seems to meander a bit. It feels like they lost the thread of their story at some point, and in some cases ran out of time to fully conclude it. Case in point. Because, as I said, while moments like these are certainly humorous, they don't feel as in line with the tone of the film. Unlike The Emperor's New Groove, which maintains a pretty light and silly feel throughout, Lilo and Stitch does have its heavy moments, its quiet moments, and these feel strange next to the completely random bits at times. How to Train Your Dragon has dozens and dozens of tropes, as I have already mentioned. But it is one of those weird anomalies where nearly every single trope seems to work. Hard-headed father-son relationship actually works. Lanky, awkward teen? I don't know if it's Jay Baruchel or the writing, but in my opinion he comes off as one of the best examples of these kinds of characters. Even his relationship with Astrid has some extremely nice moments. And the reason is because this movie has as many quiet moments that allow the audience to breathe and the characters to develop as it does loud and silly moments. It has an amazing attention to detail, from lines of dialogue to the careful explanation of how the world works, to get the audience immersed in the relationships and story. It is, to my mind, with maybe one exception, DreamWorks' finest films. And that one exception is its sequel. Because of this, I can't not give the final point to How to Train Your Dragon. Any movie that throws this many elements that should be tired, that should not work, and turns them into something this damn good deserves my praise. In DreamWorks, I will go on record. This is one scenario where, with this film's sequel, you should have won the Oscar over Disney. And honestly, maybe with the original as well. I mean, I love Toy Story 3, but this is a really good movie. So, there you go. I'm the Animated Heroine. Thanks for watching.